On paper, Takao was supposed to be a 10,000-ton cruiser. In reality, she displaced closer to 15,000 tons when fully loaded, a secret the Japanese kept carefully hidden. Her design was distinctive, a towering, almost fortress-like superstructure that rose above the sea like a pagoda of steel. It was both impressive and imposing, but it made her top-heavy. Still, Takao was a marvel of naval engineering. Armed with 10 203mm guns, 8 powerful 24-inch torpedo tubes, and armored belts up to 127mm thick, she was one of the most formidable heavy cruisers afloat. With her cruising range of 8,500 nautical miles and a top speed of 35 knots, she could run with the fastest ships in the Pacific. By the time she was commissioned in 1932, Japan's naval expansion was in full swing, and Takao was ready for action. In the years before World War II, Takao and her sisters served as flagships of the cruiser division, honing Japan's doctrine of fast, long-range surface warfare. She participated in training cruises, fleet maneuvers, and patrols that extended deep into the Pacific. Her crew, disciplined and fiercely loyal, trained for the day Japan would strike, and when that day came, Takao would be ready. When Japan launched its surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Takao was part of the covering forces operating in the South China Sea. She supported the invasions of Malaya, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies, striking Allied shipping and bombarding shore positions. Her first taste of major combat came in February 1942, during the Battle of the Java Sea. There, alongside other Japanese cruisers and destroyers, Takao unleashed devastating torpedo and gunfire salvos on the Allied fleet. The result was carnage. The Allies lost multiple ships, and the Japanese cemented their control over the region. By the middle of 1942, Takao was one of Japan's most experienced heavy cruisers. She took part in operations across the Pacific, from the invasion of Java to the Indian Ocean raid, where she and her sister ships struck British shipping with brutal efficiency. But in June 1942, the tide began to turn, as the Battle of Midway devastated Japan's carrier force, and shifted the balance of power in the Pacific. While Takao herself escaped without damage, Japan's carrier fleet was devastated. 4 fleet carriers were lost, a blow from which the Imperial Navy would never fully recover. As the war spread into the Solomon Islands, Takao and her sisters were deployed to support the bitter fight for Guadalcanal. In August 1942, during the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, she screened Japan's carriers and helped protect vital supply lines. Then, in October, she fought at the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, firing her guns in anger once again. By now, her name was well known to the Allies, a predator lurking in the Pacific, swift and deadly. It was during the campaign for Guadalcanal that Takao faced some of her most intense battles. In November 1942, she took part in the naval battle of Guadalcanal, a chaotic night engagement that pitted Japanese and American warships in close combat and under the cover of darkness. Takao and her sister Atago engaged U.S. cruisers and destroyers at close range, their 8-inch guns lighting up the night sky. Although heavily contested, Takao emerged relatively unscathed. But she had seen the growing might of the U.S. Navy, radar-guided gunnery, superior coordination, and unyielding determination. For the first time, Japan's surface fleet had met an opponent it could not easily outmaneuver or outgun. Takao remained at Singapore's Seletar Naval Base as a floating anti-aircraft battery for the remainder of the war. Her proud guns, once symbols of Japanese power, were now pointed skyward in a desperate attempt to defend the port against Allied bombers. But by 1945, Japan's empire had collapsed. American bombers pounded her cities, her navy was shattered, and her once mighty fleet was reduced to rusting hulks. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, Takao was still afloat, battered, but not broken. After the war, the British took control of Takao at Singapore. For months she lay quietly in the harbor, a ghost of her former self, while then Allied officials debated her fate. In October 1946, the decision was made: Takao would be scuttled by the Royal Navy. She was towed out to the Strait of Malacca, where explosive charges were set along her hull. On October 27, 1946, the charges were detonated. The sea erupted in foam and smoke, and Takao, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, slipped beneath the waves. Her final resting place lies deep in the waters off Malaya, alongside the memories of an empire that once dreamed of ruling the Pacific. The story of IJN Takao is one of power, innovation, and tragedy. She was a product of an era when Japan's naval architects pushed the limits of design, building ships that rivaled the world's greatest fleets. From the jungles of Java to the waters of Leyte Gulf, Takao served at the forefront of Japan's naval might. She fought in nearly every major campaign of the early Pacific War, surviving torpedoes, bombs, and relentless odds. Yet her story also mirrors Japan's own wartime arc, bold in ambition, formidable in strength, but ultimately undone by overreach and the industrial power of her enemies. Today, the Takao remains one of the most iconic cruiser designs of the interwar and wartime periods. Their towering bridges, heavy armament, and aggressive doctrine symbolize Japan's naval philosophy to strike fast and strike first. Once a weapon of war, now a memory of endurance. The IJN Takao stands as a reminder not only of Japan's naval power, but of the men who sailed her, fought for her, and in the end, went down with her honor intact. The Pacific is vast, but in its depths lie echoes of history, the steel giants of another age, whose stories continue to shape our understanding of courage, ambition, and the cost of empire. From the gun decks to the bridge, every story we tell honors those who served. If this tale made you feel the salt and steel of history, give it a like, and if you're not yet part of our channel's convoy, subscribe and join the ranks. More powerful stories await.